As cloud deployments move from rollout to upgrades and business goals begin to shift from cost savings to value creation, IT leaders face a growing set of challenges. How do you prioritize your cloud migration strategy, and how do you manage an increasingly complex mix of services? My name is Tim Scannell, Director of Strategic Content for the CIO Executive Council. Welcome to CIO Live, a series of discussions with top IT leaders on such key topics as leadership, innovation, and driving digital value at every level of an organization. The series is presented on the Enterprise CIO Forum, sponsored by HP and broadcast live. It's also distributed throughout the IDG Worldwide Network. Today I'm talking with Ed Mahon, Vice President of Information Services and CIO at Kent State University. Ed oversees the university's enterprise-wide IT architecture and operations, as well as the overall vision for Kent State's future IT environment. He's also focused on integrating innovative technologies such as cloud into Kent State's service delivery model and maintaining a high quality of service in all of his initiatives. Ed's efforts have not gone unnoticed. He was a finalist for Crane's Cleveland Business CIO of the Year in 2013 and has won other awards for innovation from CIO Magazine and Campus Technology Magazine. Ed is also a member of the CIO Executive Council's Research Advisory Board and has earned an MBA from the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and a doctorate in management from Case Western Reserve University. Welcome, Ed.
Thank you.
Ed and I are going to chat for the next half hour or so. We'll leave some time at the end for our audience Q&A, so please submit your questions using the box on the right of the screen. We really want this to be as interactive as possible. You can also leave comments in the comments section in the lower area of the page. If you're commenting via Twitter, please use hashtag CIOchat. So let's get right into it. This is a really fascinating topic with lots of little nuances. So Ed, one of the most obvious benefits of cloud-based systems and applications is the cost savings associated with the investments in resources, as well as the cost savings and support and upgrading and all those other things. But since we're all well down the road in cloud, I mean, we're already floating through the clouds right now pretty well, I wonder if you can tell me some of the more important other benefits as well outside of costs.
I'd be happy to, and you're right, there are other important benefits. And let me just throw a caveat that when one uses the word IT and cost savings in the same breath, it catches an alarm for me because, as most of us know, the benefits of and the cost savings from investments in IT don't necessarily show up in the central IT department, and they squeak out in other departments, as well they should. But in any event, using the concept of true dollars saved is somewhat risky, I think. I'd also suggest, is you're right, as you crafted it, we're well on our way, most of us, in some fashion or another, down the cloud road, and that's true for low-hanging fruit, maybe that of electronic mail or collaborative software. But from a tier 1 mission-critical point of view, our ERPs, our data warehouses, and that sort of thing, I think a rather low percentage have actually moved lock, stock, and barrel their tier 1 environment. So we really have to be careful on the cost savings concept and at the same time what's in the cloud and what isn't. But to answer your question more directly, you bet there's other important benefits. I would suggest a few. Opportunity costs associated with your staff, that is offloading their operational tasks and repurposing them to other more important business objectives would be one. Maybe getting out of the business that you know you're inefficient at would be another. There's no reason doing something that you don't do well. You could also normalize your capital expenditure budget and move toward what's far more flexible in the terms of variable costs and operating costs than that of fixed costs. So, and then lastly, if we in a little bit we might talk about platform as a service, but the concept of getting quicker and leveraging your agility and improvements in technology is another example of other benefits than just pure cost.
Yeah, but I think everyone comes back to that cost because it's such a tangible benefit to cloud. And I can imagine, though, as more and more companies are doing analysis whether they should go to cloud, whether they should do a mix of both, some sort of a hybrid approach, that cost thing must be going down that numerical chart in terms of importance. And the other stuff coming up, some of the soft values or the things that may not play out for a while.
you're right. For example, electronic storage, less than a half a penny a gig for a Glacier inside of AWS. You can't buy and manage that environment. So you're right, there are true savings. Minimizing unused capacity for the compute platforms as opposed to buying in increments with capital investments is another example to reduce that unused capacity, as well as the staff opportunity cost and just the pure purchase and management cost of storage.
Right. So I think, having a background on the media side myself, we're kind of fond of buzzwords, and one of the ones that's really well overused is cloud technology. It kind of makes people glaze over sometimes. However, it seems to be positioned in growing as more of a disruptive technology now. A lot of conversations about beyond the cost benefits, and as you mentioned, evolving with systems like ERP. How disruptive do you think it's going to get, and how do you manage that disruption going forward?
Yeah, I kind of use the joke, if it weren't for increased risk, if it weren't for increased complexity and added cost during the transition to the cloud would be a great thing. So the real challenge is to minimize that level of disruption. But the good news is it's quite possible. The functionality, the usability of born-in-the-cloud applications, or using a web development methodology with standardized tools and is object-oriented and enables you to transition right from the development of an app to production natively in the cloud, help minimize those levels of disruption. So it's thwart with difficulties, but all that have a positive end result if managed properly.
Yeah, I was speaking with a CIO a couple of days ago, and he was saying that one of the challenges that you don't realize with cloud is that is the perception of people outside your area. So before, if something failed or crashed, everyone would be running around and doing things, and it's all mayhem inside there in that organization. With cloud, things could be happening in the cloud someplace. So he said sometimes they actually have to look a little busy to make people realize they're actually doing their jobs out there, because it has such a significant impact on the organization itself.
Yeah, years ago we outsourced to Office 365, and it's been a really good move for us. Microsoft gives our industry a really good price, and on the other hand, a couple times, not often, there will be a glitch, and you find yourself, compared to days gone by where you might manage the entire message store and the rest of the Exchange environment, you're really at the mercy of the cloud provider. Maybe in a little bit we'll talk more about the SaaS opportunity, and that definitely is the case. You're at the risk. You're putting all your chestnuts in the hands of the cloud provider, particularly when it's a SaaS offering. There are plenty of design scenarios that allow you to build resiliency and redundancy into the infrastructure if you're in the infrastructure service space, so you can minimize that risk. But you're right. It does change the role of the CIO quite a bit.
Yeah, and we're going to talk a little further on about the whole vendor relationship question, and the CIO becoming more of a negotiator as well as the technologist. So we'll hit that topic later on. Let's talk a little bit about cloud alternatives. Right now there are public clouds, there are private clouds, there are hybrid clouds. Are there any one of these? You're in education, but are there any one of these that provide more security safeguards, or they have more applications in specific industries like yours, or like healthcare, or like financial?
Yeah, clearly the private cloud is, generally speaking, a single-tenant environment. So for those that have concerns of sharing a space on a server, that can be allayed that way. Also, with the private cloud, being able to mandate where your data physically lives, which country, that sort of thing is another benefit. So I would say on the surface, though you pay extra premium for a private network, that's clearly the case. Okay,
so a rather large security company, not security company, but a research house that will go unnamed, coined a term called bimodal IT about 2 years ago, meaning that if you want to go to a digital environment or digital space, or deal with digital disruption, you can do that, but at the same time maintain the status quo in IT, sort of a safeguard. You can find a balance between the two. Do you look at hybrid clouds as sort of doing this as well? Is it more of are you more of a safety net mentality doing that, or is there really a strong technological reason for doing a hybrid cloud?
Well, there's good news in a sense. You really have no choice if you think about it. You're going to live in a hybrid environment for an extended period of time. If you take our environment of north of 700 servers, we've made great progress in virtualizing them and shrinking the physical footprint, but regardless, you have no choice. If instead of just thinking of a hybrid as that between the public cloud and a private cloud, I would submit to you that your premise-based operations and, let's say, a public cloud that you have some of your services in, that too is a hybrid as well. So you can't just simply click your fingers and move from a premise-based environment to the cloud, private or public. So you're going to live in a hybrid environment during the transition as well. And for most large shops that have not just the ERP, but a web presence and mail and a host of other services that over the years have added up to be a huge storage footprint and a data center that has all of the protection gear and such, it's going to be, I would suggest, 10 years if you started tomorrow by the time the last server comes out and you turn off the lights. And so I think spending time defining what's tier 1, what's tier 2, what's other, what's end of life, what makes sense to go is where the art of the implementation is. And you used the word disruptive a few minutes ago, and I think that's the case. So yes, I think you're in a hybrid environment, but I kind of think of it first and foremost as that between the prem and the cloud. The decision whether you're in a private cloud or a public cloud is a separate issue. But the concept of, when I was kidding a minute ago, if it weren't for increasing complexity and risk, there'd be no problem. Well, for sure, if you're going to live in both environments, you're increasing complexity. You want to mitigate risk, and I think you can. And there's good news from authentication of your services and building more robust identity management systems, or putting in some enterprise management services that help you manage and visualize the overall architecture that you have in place regardless of where it lives. So there's good news, and that'll help you mitigate the risk. But clearly cost and complexity is going to go up until the transition is complete.
You know, it almost sounds like a marriage. You know, it's a learning experience. You know, it's give and take, push and pull. And I know that a lot of some companies now have they've gone into the cloud 3 years ago, and they've put a lot of applications, and they've kind of toned it back a bit and taken some of those applications and put them on premise. So is that, are you sort of evolving and learning all the time yourself? Absolutely,
it's continuous. I think for some of us that have looked at it closely, the fundamentals associated with the giants, AWS, Azure, Google now has moved from the consumer space somewhat to the enterprise space. The learning curve associated with what those services are has been minimized, but the marketplace that surrounds those giants, most of us are just flabbergasted by the quantity, and it's a good news problem to have, though, because the features and capabilities that those smaller vendors that make up the marketplace that surround those cloud giants have services and products that are extremely useful, and as you go into the transition, you'll want to surround yourself with a few of them that have the type of services and products that you'll want.
And earlier we talked about I know cloud being around there for a while, and it's sort of boring for a lot of people. It's one of those eternal buzzwords. But I imagine you know, it's evolving to such an extent and changing, as you said, those smaller companies as opposed to the larger companies and innovative startups, that it could really dramatically change over the next few years, and you really have to watch for those changes and be agile enough to take advantage of them, I imagine.
Yeah, for sure. Although it's a no-brainer with a startup, as opposed to, you could make a case that the transition costs for an extended move to the cloud for an existing and more complex operation doesn't make sense. I could make that argument. I won't. I think it makes sense to make the transition, but it would be reasonable to make that. But with startups, it's a no-brainer. You don't have that complexity in place, and there would be no reason to start. Good example are some of the born in the cloud giants, a Workday. It'd be hard to argue against that, born in the cloud ERP as opposed to a legacy environment, or Salesforce.com to buy into a web development platform and gain access to the app exchange and that of other vendors and be able to plug and play. It's hard to argue that, particularly if you're a startup. But I think most of us that manage large operations are realizing that that's an enabler for us as well.
Right. Let's talk about security. Security is obviously a huge concern across the board, especially when relying on outside resources in a cloud environment. Are today's tools and protective measures good enough, or is there room for improvement in terms of these tools or security applications or add-ons?
You know, I was reading a Google white paper on how they do security, and I found myself at the end saying that it was, first off, it's a wonderful white paper, if nothing else than to confirm that the types of activities you're doing in-house are those. So the first thing I would suggest is that the cloud giants do security better than we do. And I would suggest that's for a couple of reasons. One, they often have staff specialization where we often do not. The folks that we have doing security are a jack of all trades and do other things. So first, they have staff specialization that I think helps them do a good job. Secondly, they have compliance, and you mentioned financial and healthcare industries a few minutes ago, and no doubt they have regulation and compliance requirements. The good news is that these cloud providers have SAS 70 audits that when you go about the business of building SLAs or service level agreements with your contracts, if you did do business with them, you can clearly build into it the requirement for you personally to see their SAS 70 audit results. So you'll have a really good understanding of how secure their environment is on a go-forward basis, quarterly, annually, what have you. So I would just, and lastly, we all have a lot to lose by having a breach, but I would suggest that the cloud providers have the largest to lose, or equal to anyone else, and that it's directly related to the business viability of their existence. There aren't many of us that would put our data or our service into a cloud that's had a breach, a cloud provider. It would cause us pause for sure. But I would just also say, apart from what I've just suggested, that the cloud can do it equal or better than anyone, the cloud providers, the big giants, if you will. But I'd also say it's worth spending time defining what security is about. Of course, it's the data is where the bad guy goes. It's also about service disruption. The bad guy likes to disrupt our services as well. And when we start thinking about information security, I would say it's a team sport. It's not just the cloud provider. I think it's safe computing by the end user. I think it's policies and procedures associated with our own corporations as well. So I wouldn't try to move it forward on just the cloud provider itself. But I think when you begin that discussion with the cloud provider, by and large, you're going to be pleased.
So the rule is, there's better security by these major cloud providers, the AWSs and all that, but don't give up that firewall mentality that you've worked to construct so well before you went to the cloud. So in terms of the security tools that you can implement, is there a danger of clashing with those larger tools, or is it more difficult to implement your own tools because you're watching at things like do they work well with the larger AWS tools and things like that?
Yeah, good question. The devil's in the details, and you just suggested it. So there's no question if you've deployed a identity management system for your prem, you're going to want to expand that to authenticate and authorize in a more integrated way as you move to services in the cloud as well. I think encryption, endpoint, servers, all of the rest, you're going to have to want to sit down and design where the starts and stops are. But again, I think when you sit down to have that discussion with a potential cloud provider, they're going to have answers for you. One other suggestion or one other example of how the cloud marketplace that surrounds the cloud giants is in this space. They've got migration tools and security appliances and methodologies that will be useful during the transition. And again, I mentioned the transition is going to cost you more, and so the idea of saving money during the transition is probably not the reason why you would suggest doing it, because you won't. You may save opportunity and unused capacity, as I mentioned, but you won't save real dollars because you're going to spend them. You're going to spend them on these appliances or services. It may be that we've been paying now for some time for these consultant services to do penetration testing or vulnerability testing or monitoring for us or evaluating some of the data that our logs from these encryption devices and intrusion detection devices gather up, and that's all good. We're just going to have to expand it to a larger universe as well. So there's good news. There's plenty of services and products from the cloud marketplace that can help a lot.
So the rule of thumb is whether you're working with someone right now, or a cloud services person or a company, or you're looking for a company out there, is to really not consider them as a provider, but more as a partner. And if you do that, how difficult is it to do that from the get-go and then maintain that relationship?
Yeah, I don't use the word partner very often. I mean, it's a cool MBA term, I guess, but from where
well, you have the MBAs, that's why I threw it out there.
Yeah, well, it's more fee for service. It's more clear roles and responsibilities for me. It's more a service level agreement and dotting the I's and crossing the T's. And all I'm suggesting are there are third-party providers out that know the AWSs and Azures like the back of their hand and can help you put in the right systems as you expand your infrastructure and your architecture.
All right, a cloud is really like obviously it's a pipeline, but from your standpoint, it's almost like a shopping bag, and it's what you put into that shopping bag that makes a difference in terms of your applications, or more importantly, your data. So, what are some of the challenges of managing data, potentially lots of data, because now you're in a cloud environment, and especially when that data is spread out across multiple internal and external and hybrid, non-hybrid, on-premise, and may consist of multiple formats?
Yeah, you've hit on a really, really important point, and I'll just go back to the premise of getting grounded on what your current environment is about, whether it's to what extent are you virtualized and how does that relate to creating a virtualized environment in the cloud, or what type of appliances do you need to put in place to back up to the cloud or archive to the cloud or do a full-blown disaster recovery model of the cloud. In addition to that kind of work that starts with what your current architecture looks like, if you think about those preparatory tasks associated with data management, I would submit to you that the first half a dozen or so are in your own backyard. And so I'll submit that most of us will hang our head when we realize we do not enforce our current retention schedule. So the rate of growth of data is astronomical, as we know, but we're not very good at hit and delete. And we often have policies that allow us to do it, but we don't. And in some regards, you could make the case it's too expensive and too laborious and difficult to do that, as opposed to just sweep it under the carpet, put it out in Glacier and AWS, and it won't cost much, and it'll live there forever. But in any event, dealing with different classification types, including structured and unstructured data, multiple data life cycles, and different retention and destruction requirements are really tough, and those really have nothing to do with the cloud. I'd also say, though, as you move toward the cloud, the design trade-offs are going to be that between latency, performance, and redundancy. So, if it's an archive solution, you can deal with archives or of storage that's designed for that. Latency is not an issue. On the other hand, you have a SAN or a NAS in your data center for a reason. You need to be able to get at that data early and often, and that's an issue. And then redundancy is back to, I coupled it with security for a few minutes ago, but you might just think of it from a resiliency point of view, where you need to architect that data and where it's stored so it's there, whether there's the eastern seaboard electrical grid goes south, that it's available from the west or what have you. And so there are plenty of challenges that start both with taking a look at what the data is and what is unique and different about your current environment, and are there any non-technical issues that you can address that can simplify or minimize what problem you have. And then it becomes a separate issue to map those storage characteristics to what products and services exist in the cloud.
Sounds like a lot of homework you have to do.
Yeah, but I would also say it's the sweet spot in the cloud. I'm pretty excited about the cloud in every regard, although I'm still grounded in my approach of defining what problem we're trying to solve and that sort of thing. But clearly, there are several sweet spots in the cloud that are no-brainers. Storage is one of them.
Okay, so as I said, you mentioned the word policies before, and I think that's very important. It's something that has that term has been bandied about since mobile computing became popular. We start with policies and policy management, and it's at a whole new level right now. And I think you mentioned the term compliance, and there's governance. And when you're in a financial environment, you're sort of there already, so you recognize the importance of that. Should people in other areas like education, like manufacturing, also be concerned and put just as much effort into those areas as well?
I think so, although I recall several years ago quizzing one of the cloud giants as to what their policies were in that space in terms of compliance and such, and they turned back to me and asked me, well, tell us about yours. and it was a pretty calculated guess that this CIO might not have all of that detail on the tip of his tongue, and that was a fair suggestion. And so what I find is it's important for us to understand what our own compliance issues are and not start into the conversation with the cloud provider that the compliance that they're going to need to adhere to are greater than yours. So it just seems like it could be used as a wall or a means of slowing down the train or the migration to the cloud. But there are conversations that are easy to have. I think the cloud providers realize it's important. It's a key attribute of many industries, and so it just helps the conversation to start there. It's a balance between the policy and the technology as well as the fiscal characteristics.
Right, and the temptation will always be to see what someone else is doing and try to duplicate, they did this, I'm going to do that too, but the key is to get your own house in order because every house is different.
Right.
So I think the term cloud is an apt name. For one, it's everything up in the ether. It's all the data floating back and forth. So that's one aspect of clouds. Another aspect of clouds is no two clouds are the same. Generically, they may be, but in terms of the individual clouds, how do you manage scaling? How do you plan for things in a cloud environment? Is it more difficult to worry about things like scalability when you move to the cloud?
Well, it's funny you should mention that because on the surface you would think it would be easier. Look, you can move from infrequent large capital expenditures for capacity on servers or storage, what have you. You could move to capacity on demand, for example, and that it would just ratchet up as those peaks on load require it. But what I've found is that it's not quite that easy, and adding capacity requires some thought from the pricing models that are available to the technical characteristics of which server you actually select. So, yeah, that's where there's a lot of complexity, but there's lots of help for all of us that haven't been there. And for me, I like to surround myself when I'm getting into something I've not done before with those that have. And so I think you're right. There, on the surface, it looks like it would be a wonderful opportunity to obtain capacity and performance on demand, and that it would just be easy. But I haven't found it that way yet. So
you have to be agile in that respect, and it seems like it would have a pretty major impact on the organization as well. So let's talk a little bit about organizational changes, IT structure. What happens when you move to the cloud, either totally or in a hybrid environment? Is it a dramatic change? Is there some Sturm und Drang there? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, and I think the old phrase "computers are easy and people are difficult" indirectly gets to the point you're making. And the transition strategy that I'm essentially suggesting you need to develop, it could just be a logical offshoot of your sourcing strategy that hopefully you already have in place with your existing vendors and such. One of the cornerstones is the staff. You can't do it without them. And if, in fact, I'm suggesting you will end up wanting to repurpose most of your staff to other types of duties, then the sooner you include them in the design process and the evaluation process and pilot operations and such, the better. But what I'm finding is that you're gonna need new titles. You're going to need new skills. You're going to need a cloud architect. You're going to need a cost accountant if you buy into the suggestion that I've made, which is you need to know how you're spending your money and how your staff is spending their time. And so the staff is the key part of it, and I suggest our current IT job families are going to need to be updated pretty soon to incorporate what skills you need in the cloud. On the other hand, a key staple in the infrastructure service business, of course, is the system administrator. And as it turns out, they've been living in a jack-of-all-trades mode for a long time. They don't just simply manage servers. They do a host of other things, too. So my sense is that you've got the staff already. If you've been managing your operation 5 nines, you just need to involve them early and begin to transition how you need to use them, and I found that all of us are excited about that next new thing.
So you have cost savings. You have a staff that acts differently, has to act with different skills, title changes. So has this impacted the dynamics that you have with the interaction with the other members of the C-suite? Is the CFO now your best friend as opposed to the CEO or the CMO?
Well, I like to think that they have been my best friend.
They better be.
The CIO stands for career is over, so we want to. There's a way to solve that, and that's to manage expectations as well as the technology. But managing expectations and technology and projects and people are all part of it, and the technology is only one component. But we have a cloud strategy posted on our web that has an executive summary for the audience you mentioned that might want to just get the gist of it. It also has an operational transition plan that makes it very clear to the entire IT team and anyone else that might read it. Like, for example, prospective vendors, they can have a clear understanding of where we are and what we're thinking about as the next step. So I think the balance of the C-suite appreciates those that plan and are thoughtful and have their finger on what their needs are, independent of what the technology needs to be. And so if you can make certain you know what their needs are, how you go about it is a secondary issue.
Mm-hmm. What about the impact on new techniques and new approaches to streamlining or making your department more productive? Everyone is talking about an agile environment. They're talking about DevOps. Does cloud technology or the entrance of cloud change that scope a little bit?
It leverages it. I'll just jump on the bandwagon. You mentioned agile. I've got staff members that think a great deal of that methodology, and though I'm a good project manager from yesteryear, and I'm a layman with Agile, I looked at it pretty closely, and it sure seems to make complete sense to me. And then further, the web development methodologies available from cloud providers today were written around Agile. So being able to replicate and automate in that web development environment in the cloud is just a win-win. So my sense is it makes sense to look at Agile whether you're going to the cloud or not. But there's good news: if you do move to the cloud, you'll find that that's the project management tool that you'll want, at least in the platform as a service space and developing web apps. It's proven to be a really good hand-in-glove fit.
So is it better to consider Agile or some a revamp of your structure after you go to cloud, or is it easier, you've already been there, then you go to cloud and you do a little tweaking?
Should have been started using it a year ago.
Okay, all right.
Independent of the cloud.
Okay, fair enough. Moving to the cloud is not as easy as it seems. I mean, obviously, if it was easy, you wouldn't have CIO.com and other publications, online sites writing about it all the time. Even the experts say it's not easy. Two of the most common mistakes made are treating cloud deployments as an extension of virtualization, which it definitely is not. Focusing too much on the technology aspects and not enough on business stakeholders, as we talked about earlier, and partner relations in having those negotiation skills. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think you nailed it. The technology is almost secondary. I mentioned activity-based costing a few minutes ago. Either you might have another preferred cost management schema, but I think the first order of business is to get grounded in what your current operation is, to define what the cost is associated with your capital equipment, where it is in its life cycle, to look at your software applications from the tier 1s to shadow systems and see where they are in their maturity. Ask if they're still serving the need, or what's the future of those. For example, they may be low-hanging fruit as a SaaS offering where you don't need to staff up for all the plumbing underneath it, and you could just purchase a canned SaaS solution that upgrades what you currently have, and you could make that transition. You're going to, assuming this particular one is close to end of life, you'll need to do that anyway. So getting grounded with a good cost management system, I think, makes sense first and foremost. Now comes a real challenge in comparing unlike units of measurement, looking at fixed cost scenarios to consumption-based pricing is a real challenge, and so as anyone might expect, the management judgment process will come to play pretty quickly. But if you have a keen awareness where you are, maybe you're about out of storage capacity, and so you'll have an opportunity to enter the cloud or buy, because you have to buy more storage regardless. So if you get ahead of that a year or half a year and kick the tires or develop a pilot, I think you'll be in a good position to make an informed decision that's not risky.
Yeah, the last thing you want to do is make a decision based on desperation. If you're up against the wall and running out of storage, you should think about that a long time ago. Like as you said, the best time to think about it is a year ago. Here's a question from someone in our audience. What things should an organization look for in cloud applications or service providers, aside from the great price tag? Are there any pluses, minuses, or red flags you can look at?
Yeah, I assume the question is related to software as a service applications.
Yeah.
The benefits of looking in the cloud is you can, and selecting a cloud SaaS-based application, is you can avoid issues with outdated software, avoid needing the skills for the infrastructure platform underneath it. Often it delivers faster time to value, impacts the IT staff less, frees them up to do other activities. But concerns that you'd want to look at or understand is, first off, you're going to entrust that third-party provider, the cloud, soup to nuts, and so you need to be aware that you're to hold on, you're about to lose control, kind of thing. That's for sure. That's a concern. Outages are out of your control, as you were kidding the other day, a few minutes ago, as if an outage occurred, the CIO is twiddling his thumbs, just hoping and praying that it'll come back up. So that's another valuable consideration to realize that they're out of your control. Client dependency on the SaaS provider to maintain compliance and performance. So if you were to buy into a SaaS app for your ERP, you're now completely dependent on them to ensure the compliance as well as the adequate performance is acceptable. And then I would also say that the bad news here is at the moment you decide that you're going to enter a SaaS offering, and I'm obviously thinking of a SaaS offering that's of significant importance to you, not some secondary operation, but if it's an ERP or web presence or something that's absolutely critical to you, the bad news is the day you sign is the same day you need an exit strategy, because you need to be able to have it well defined when and how you're going to get the data out of that SaaS operation, and to a large extent that applies with PaaS and infrastructure as service as well. But those are a few positives and negatives associated with a SaaS environment.
And it's interesting. Exit strategy, an interesting concept. You've dealt with cloud providers and talked with a lot of them before you made final decisions. Do they like talking about exit strategies? It seems like you're talking about ending the relationship before you even started it.
No, I don't think they do. And I would love to know of 100 customers that they onboard, how many of them they discussed exit strategies with. I think it starts with contractual wording that underscores who owns the data, that you do, of course, they don't. But it requires clarity as to when you'll get the data back and in what form when the relationship terminates. It's worse than that, though. It's not just getting your data back. It's about the service disruption that you can't allow. So, frankly, if it were of no fault of yours or the relationship you have with that cloud provider, if they had a business viability model that went under, you not only need your data back, but you need a service, and you need it quickly. So, again, preaching the concept that you're not into the cloud to save money, you might suggest you should build it in two separate cloud providers and keep them independent of each other. To be out of primary services to cut checks for people or pay bills or address a manufacturing facility or keep your web order entry up and operational are mission critical. So the bad news is depending how critical your services are, and I suspect everyone has critical services that are business threatening, you need an exit strategy both for getting the data out of the primary cloud provider and to restore the service in an entirely different cloud provider. So here you now having to design two environments for that purpose. The primary cloud service, compute capacity and storage and whatnot, and a secondary one as well.
So you should always have a plan B, because I know I had some experience with a cloud-based storage providers, because I want to put all my data there in case my hard disk crashed. And every year, when I have to renew, they say you have 5 days to renew before they erase everything. And it's sort of like, yikes! It's I need a plan B, but I shouldn't have waited this long to do it. Is it advisable to find or search for cloud providers who know a lot about your business, or is that a secondary concern? I mean, I'm sure that one-size technology doesn't fit all.
At the canned application or SaaS space, it's a given that you have to, right? The software functionality that's inherent in those SaaS apps are directly related to the business you're trying to serve. So that's absolutely necessary. The opposite of that might be AWS and infrastructure as a service. They've built such a wonderful cloud compute and storage platform with tools around it that they are able to allow you to install apps on their infrastructure independent of what those apps do. So I'd say it depends on the entrance to the cloud, where and who and what you're doing as to how much that cloud provider needs to know about your business.
Okay, here's another question from our audience. How do you balance that mandate to innovate with cloud-based applications and technologies with the daily business of keeping things running, keeping the lights on? We talked earlier about a bimodal approach to things, sort of as a safeguard. Is there any formula to doing that?
Sure. You know, your question, the listener's question, reminds me of the pyramid, the age-old pyramid, where slice the pyramid into 3 categories. The bottom being the baseline operation that I think the person's referring to, the email, the network, the basic fundamentals, the baseline services. The middle third would be middleware, where you would have ERPs and other mission-critical components of the infrastructure that would allow you to make sure it runs as well. But the top third is innovation, in my view. And if you think of it as a pyramid, unfortunately, most of us have the fewest staff at the top where innovation exists. So I would suggest to you 10 years from now that the fundamental transformational nature that IT departments will have experienced is they'll be able to rebalance the percent of FTEs that are directly coupled with the customer, that understand exactly what the business is, and they're implementing go-to-business solutions that way, rather than the way it is now, where the preponderance of IT staffs are doing baseline services. The baseline services are absolutely critical, but where we really can be judged to add the most value, where the dollars invested, is with innovation. So I would suggest that's the pyramid. That's how I look how IT is staffed and managed and dollars are spent and so on. But all of us long for the day where we can put more staff and effort toward innovation.
Innovation, yeah, it's an important term. And here at the Council, we say that innovation drives digital transformation. Whatever you're going to do in terms of digital, innovation is really driving efforts there. So it's important for a company to really focus on innovation. Are cloud-based services, or is the cloud mentality or approach conducive to innovation within an organization? Because a lot of the IT execs we talk to say we just don't have the time to be innovative because we're down in the trenches. So does cloud release a lot of that pressure?
Absolutely. It's a claim to fame. If you were to net it out as to what the cloud's value is, that's it. Take the web development architectures and that are out there and methodologies to help build automated workflows to replicate more quickly, to automate functions and pump out web apps of that sort. There's no question that that's a better model than most of us have built. First of all, it's probably the fact that if you've been building web apps for a number of years, you probably have more tools of different flavors than you want to admit. I know if you came into my garage and looked around at how many brands and types of tools I have, there's not a lot of standardization, and so you could easily say the cost of ownership of having multiple tools from multiple vendors that serve the same purpose not only is inefficient and unnecessary, but it adds to the complexity of quickly getting at replicating and automating the process to build web apps. So that's the innovation. There may be other areas of innovation that folks have, but for me it's simplifying processes, getting business impacting apps out more quickly is where the lion's share of innovation is for us.
Yeah, but don't discount those shiny new tools. And I like them, you like them, and I have 19 wrenches, but I always like the shiny new wrench that I've seen at the local hardware store.
Well, the good news is you'll be glad when your staff takes a look at those shiny tools in the cloud, in the PaaS space. They're going to just love it because they're all shiny and new and they're integrated, and they too want to develop apps more quickly. So I don't know of anyone that will be unhappy when they take a look.
And they're probably optimized for cloud environments because they're all shooting to the latest thing, not things that...
Well, absolutely. If you subscribe to the point that born in the cloud apps is better as opposed to trying to retrofit a premise base into the cloud, if you buy into that, then here's your opportunity to build in the cloud, and if nothing else, the change management mechanism to put into production in the cloud is easier.
Okay, so we're getting close to our wrap-up time, and before we do that, what's a final recommendation you can give to everyone out there who's either considering going to the cloud or they're just getting involved in cloud right now, and maybe they're losing their lust for that because things aren't going so well?
Yeah, a two-pronged approach. Continue to do your due diligence and discovery with what the cloud is. It won't be that difficult, but it's necessary, and you should enjoy it. I've noticed that a lot of the cloud giants have wonderful conferences these days, as well as online material. They're even better than yesteryear conferences that were multi-vendor specific, but there's lots of cloud marketplace vendors at these unique ones. But they have materials at those conferences and also wonderful online tutorials as well. You can't beat it. So I'd say a two-pronged approach. One, continue or begin the discovery of what the key elements are in the cloud, and then two, the other point I've been making for the whole 30-40 minutes here has been get grounded in what your current operation is. Find out how your staff is spending its time and evaluate whether you're efficient at that. Understand where your applications are in their maturity level. Do a rationalization both at the infrastructure and the application and see if there's an opportunity, because you're going to have to make a switch as well. So take a look at what your costs are, what your true problems are. If you have an IT service portfolio, which services might you get rid of? Which ones are difficult for you to maintain? Is that an opportunity for the cloud? So it's pretty simple. Discovery methodology on the cloud and get grounded where you are now. And if you had to ask me which is more important, it's the latter. Get yourself grounded into what your current costs, what your current unused capacity is, what your current staff opportunity costs are, where are those areas that you're missing that you know your customers want, and then overlay that to the cloud and see if it's an opportunity. It may not be an opportunity, but if it is, it might allow you to deliver value more quickly.
So know your problems before you go looking for a solution. Is that simple?
That's true.
So Ed, along with all your academic and professional accomplishments, you're also an author, or you'll soon be a known author, a published author. You're working on a book about migrating to the cloud. I know it's not out for a few weeks, but can you tell us a little bit about that book and maybe offer some key points? Give us a little taste of it.
Sure. Well, it won't surprise you that it is built on the very premise that I've been talking about in the last 30 days. It starts with defining the problem that we all have in our current service delivery model. It takes a moment from a business perspective and not necessarily in the technical plumbing to define what the cloud is and what that architecture and marketplace looks like. It then provides the enterprise architects a wonderful opportunity to define where those strategies are, what your current environment is, and in ways that's going to overlay with the next chapter, which is really building scenarios and use cases, potential ones that you might want to consider. And then it concludes with building a cloud sourcing strategy, one that leverages your current business relationships. I haven't mentioned that, but that's another key area to consider, the business, your current relationships, your current contracts. No doubt you've outsourced things in one way or the other already. And so it's really just a cookbook on how to get from here to there.
All right, and I'll encourage everyone to look for that book, and I've already promised I'll be tweeting out details on that when it is published. So follow my Twitter stream, or the Twitter stream of the forum. That's about all the time we have today. Remember, this interview will be available on demand shortly after this live session. Please check out the additional resources on the page. You'll find them very useful. Our next CIO live event is scheduled for Tuesday, November 3rd at 2 p.m. Eastern, and we'll be featuring our guest IT leader, Steve Handel, who's the Executive Vice President of Technology and Innovation at the Holman Automotive Group, which is the parent company of ARI, which is the largest privately held vehicle fleet management company in the world. It's on their website, so it must be true. We'll be tackling a fairly big topic with Steve, big data, and how to analyze and make use of large amounts of information throughout an organization. I'd like to again give my special thanks to Ed Mann from the Kent State University for his time and his insights and all his information he shared with us today. And thanks again to our sponsor, HP. And thanks everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate it. And so for the Enterprise CIO Forum and the CIO Executive Council, I'm Tim Scannell. We'll see you next time.
Bye.